Snow still hung in the air though the swords were sheathed. It clung to the beard and mustache and eyebrows of men who had once been enemies and were now, for a day, nothing. It softened the hard lines of battlements and covered gore with a clean sheet that neither judged nor blessed. From the parapet above Winterfell's eastern gate the world looked like a blank page, wind-scorched and quiet, except for the thin whistle that slipped from between stone teeth where the snow collected and melted and froze into small, smooth horns of ice. He stood there a long time, gloved hands on the cold rock, watching the flat white light settle over the yard where they were dragging bodies to the charnels. Men had begun already to speak a name for the day, but he had told them not to. Names were for songs and victories were for men who believed in songs. The North would not be won by a name. The battle had given him Winterfell. It had not given him warmth. The scent of smoke drifted to him from the boilers and from the pyres they were building behind the stables. Beneath his boots the stone held a faint heat, the castle's hot springs moving under it like old blood. He could feel it most keenly in the ball of each foot and along the bones of his shins. He had never cared for such hidden comforts. He distrusted what he could not see. Yet this warmth threaded up through the granite and into him just enough to remind his body it belonged among the living. The living must always contend with the dead. A rider crossed the yard with 2 spearmen trotting after him and a limp figure tied over the saddle. Another rider, this one leading a horse whose reins were looped around a paling. The animal had a bite out of its neck, ragged and purpled. He observed without comment. Accounts of losses would be brought when they could be counted. He would wait for the numbers and then he would weigh them. He had won. The numbers would tell him what the winning cost. "Your Grace," Justin Massey said softly, coming up at his side as if the stone could shade his voice. "The great hall is ready." "What passes for ready?" he said. Behind them, the ragged remains of a stag banner stirred, the black cloth edged white with clinging frost, the crowned head of the beast more silhouette than sigil. They were mending the banners that could be mended and cutting new ones from torn tents and tablecloths. A laughable business if banners were anything but signals in a storm. In such weather a flag was a flare, and flare was life. He turned from the wall, the weight of his cloak dragging and whispering along the snow-slick stones. They moved downward through a passage whose slitted windows puffed ghostly breath as the draft met the air. Soot streaked the lintels and made old tear lines beneath. In several places, someone had scoured the black to a dull gray, and it pleased him to see those stains cut back to the seam of stone. In a castle, filth was an enemy. He had learned that early at Storm's End.
Krast biels on neglect, neglect breds rot, rot breds collapse.
They taught that lesson with bread and mold and the patience of a siege. At the bottom of the steps, a boy ran across the passage with a basket of kindling, saw him and went still. The boy's hair was as colorless as the sky beyond the windows. His cheeks were raw and split. "Go," Stannis said, and the boy ran on. In the great hall they had hung both wolves and stags. The dire wolf of Winterfell, gray on white, flew above the dais, slightly higher than the stag, and to either side the lesser banners of houses that had bent the knee over the past 3 days. The height of a sigil mattered to men here. He had noticed that as soon as he rode north of the neck. Let them see their wolf higher. Let them think of the old times and their own old oaths. He would grip that rope and pull when he needed to. The hall had been repaired hurriedly. The tables were wiped clean with handfuls of wet straw. Steam rose where hot water had been splashed on the flagstones. The long, low fires that ran the length of the hall hissed and licked at the green wood laid atop the old coals. The walls sweated from the unseen springs, and the heat had a dampness to it that would not be tamed by flame. Wyman Manderley had taken a place near the head of the dais, as close to the salt as his size allowed without threatening the table. It took up a decided amount of space simply for him to sit. He had a napkin on his knee and his rings were so bright that they made small suns on the wood when he moved his hand. Every so often he rubbed at his left knee, a habit or an ache, perhaps both. Beside him stood 2 white harbor men in sea-gray wool, their hair clipped short in sailor's fashion. They stared at the fires as if at a place memory. On the other side of the long table sat Rickard Riswell, hard-eyed and spare, with 2 sons behind him, both lean and too still, like dogs that had not yet been loosed but had caught the scent and were quivering under the skin. A little further down, Morzumber, Crowfood, had a haunch of something on a trencher and was tearing it apart with his hands and teeth as if it had offended him. He had only one eye and it shone wetly, laughing at the world. Others sat where they dared, in clusters that announced old loyalties and new necessities. Mountain men in bare skins, knights in battered plate with their painted shields too chipped to read. They rose when he entered. The sound was the soft thunder of benches sliding and men standing. Stannis took his chair and did not sit at once. He placed his hands on the table. They were scratching the soot from the carved wolves along the table's edge. The whitewood stood out where knife tips had scraped away years. "Sit," he said. They did. Justin Massey stood behind him, and to his right Godry Faring, who smelled faintly of horse and char. The maester. He refused to use the man's name until the man had earned it, hovered in the NGS, eyes glittering behind half-frozen lashes. Stannis had already noted that the maester had a habit of looking from under his lids, as if everything pained him. If it did, so be it. Pain is a lesson. He would see how quickly the man learned. "We will not speak of victory," Stannis said, because he had told himself he would not. "The castle is ours. The dead are not. The winter takes what it takes. You sit here because you remember oaths, or because you are hungry and this hall is warmer than the yard. It is all the same to me as long as duty is done. Listen, then. We have a day and a half of decent weather, 2 if the mother smiles, and then more snow. The stores here are low. We begin with honest weighing." He nodded to Justin, who produced the first of the ledgers and began to read the counts they had drawn from the cellars and lofts and buttery. Barley, oats hard as shot, smoked beef, 2 cows' worth, one of them touched with mold that would be cut away, a barrel of dried apples, turnips softening, the fish caught beneath the ice in the moat, 3 sacks of flour tucked away by some Bolton cook who had been thrifty enough to save from his own pot. He heard the numbers as if they were men on a field. So many sound, so many broken, so many worth a gamble. Salt and fat, Wyman Manderley breathed, his voice plush and low, as if he had tasted a stew in his mind. "Salt and fat will mend anything. Salt and fat will not grow crops in snow," Stannis said, without looking at him. "We will ration. Soldiers to a measure, household staff to half, the wounded to what they require. The horseflesh will be kept for mounts unless wounded beyond use. The Garrons eat hay, and hay does not feed a man. I have seen men chew straw in worse winters, but it made more misery than meat. The men will not eat the horse meat unless there is no choice, and when that choice is made I will announce it, not wake to find a stable empty and a soldier with a bloody mouth." No one laughed. It was not a jest. "We will send out 6 hunting parties before the drifts rise again," he went on. "The Godswood, the nearby Wolfwood, the open ground south of the King's Road. Do not chase deer into snow that will break a leg. Do not waste arrows on crows. Bring hares by the ears and strip them before the thaw turns them foul." He let the words settle. He wanted the practical before the political. It had always been that way in him. On a belly with bread, a man can hear law. "Now," he said, "names." The names came like coals tossed onto a brazier. Who had bent the knee openly the previous day, who had sent proxies, who had closed their gates. The Dreadfort still flew flayed men. The Hornwoods were with him, the mountain clans as well, the Serwins and Tallhearts broken and pieced back together from those who had survived and kept to a stubborn line. Lady Barbary Dustin had gone to Barrowton before the battle, what few oxen she had left pulling wagons heavy with grain. There were whispers that she intended to tell the tale of the day to whichever southern ear would buy it. Stannis did not build his walls out of whispers. The noise of it tired him, the political hiss that courts call talk. He let it wash to shore and ebb again, and only lifted his hand when it was time to make a thing solid. "We will speak clearly now," he said when the lads with the trenchers were carrying off bones, and the last of the beer had been divided into cups that could be called portions with charity. "You have bent the knee to me. You have done so because you desire a king who holds the law. This north has had men for banners whose lords gave their houses to treachery. That ends now. He could feel the room tighten almost invisibly as men remembered the Boltons, and the Freys who had come north and found it cold. Justice will be had, he said, and it cost him nothing to say it. Justice was meat and drink to him. But the north is a peculiar land. Its law is older than mine. I will not pretend otherwise. Your law says a certain name rules this castle. Stark, Crowfoot Umber said, as if spitting a seed. Stark, Stannis agreed, without any pleasure. He had not come north to make room at his table for some boy. He had come to claim a throne. But he had come also to hold a kingdom, and he was iron-minded enough to know the difference. What you called Arya has been proved a fraud. You knew it. I knew it. The wolves can smell their own. But I have in my cells a man who served in this castle from boyhood and betrayed it as a man. A man who knows what he did and who cares more for his own skin than any oath. I would hear what he knows, and I would have you hear it so that later you do not say I whispered and tricked. He gestured, and Godry Faring nodded to the door. They brought him in between two guards. He shuffled, not because his ankles were chained, but because his body did not yet remember what small freedoms could feel like. The hair that clung to his skull was thin and old straw. His face was a map of welts, old and new. He kept his eyes down until one of the guards lifted his chin with a knuckle. Then he looked across the hall and flinched from the banners. He had been a boy here once, a prince of nothing with a lord's table to dine at and a wolf to run beside. The shame of it stuck to him like the smell of the damp rags he wore. Theon Greyjoy, Justin announced. No one needed the introduction. Theon's eyes found Stannis as if the name itself turned his head. For a heartbeat, something bright, fear or wild hope, glowed in the man's ruined face. Then it guttered. You asked to speak, Stannis said. Speak now. Theon swallowed. When he spoke, his voice had the dry crumble of leaves. He stopped. He looked down at his fingers, which trembled. I killed 2 boys, he said. Came out soft. You know that. I burned them, put their small heads on spikes. But they were not Eddard Stark's sons. He lifted his head. Udden stubborn. His eyes were as pale as melted snow. They were not Bran and Rickon. They were little ones from the village, nameless to me, and I'm a curse for it. The trueborn wolves lived. They fled in the night. The sound that went through the hall was like wind under a door. In it was disbelief and memory, and a scraping hope that had not fed in years and now raised its head to sniff. How do you know? Manderly asked, his rich voice flat for once. I hunted them, Theon said, eyes shredding themselves against the past. I chased them to the mill. When they escaped me, I found 2 small bodies and made them into what I needed. A lie for a crown. Lies make poor crowns, Stannis said, almost to himself. Then louder, and after, Theon said. The boys went into the wild. One went north with a foolish giant of a man and children. The other, I think he went south to a place of islands and rocks. I feared letters and crows. He blinked, struggling to gather old facts from the cage of his own pain. The man who raised me taught me to speak truth when I could and hold my tongue when I must. A bitter flare burned his mouth as if he had tasted a rot. I forgot the truth too long. I remember it now. The boys lived. A murmur rose and fell. Men's faces creased with the calculations of blood. A Stark boy was a banner you could hold up in the worst storm and claim shelter beneath. Stannis looked at Theon and saw, past the scars and the stink, a key. It would be an ugly one, bitten by shame, tarnished by treason. Still, keys are made for turning. Names, Stannis said again, quiet. Speak the names you know. Bran, Theon said. He had to swallow, as if the syllable hurt him. And Rickon. Stannis let silence sit on the table like a third trencher. He had no gift with men. He did not know how to charm or soothe. But he knew when to stop talking and let the things said turn deeper in them. Manderly's wide mouth curved as if into a prayer he had not known he still remembered. Crowfoot Umber slapped his palm on the table and made a noise that could have been laughter. Riswell's fingers drummed once and then lay still, absorbing the change. "Your Grace," said the maester from the shadows, drawn forward by the gravity of the moment despite his habit. "There have been rumors. Fisherfolk speak of one of the boys seen in places he should not be. Other tales insist both died. Tales multiply in cold places. But if this is true, tales do not sit at my table," Stannis said. "I deal in living men and what they do." He stood. The shift of him made the hall rise a little in the way that rooms do when the center of them moves. "Hear me. If a Stark boy breathes, the North must know I will protect that breath while I still possess my own. You have thought me hard. You are right. The law is hard. It is iron, not silk. But law was born to keep children safe in their beds, not warm the benches of lords who wish to drink and sing. I have no liking for singing. I will bind myself on this point. I will hold this castle in trust for the rightful heir of Winterfell while I hold the throne that is mine by rights other than northern. I will not steal from a boy because his house is convenient to me." He felt all eyes on him, measuring. "You will not be Lord of Winterfell," Riswell said slowly, his face as still as a pond. "You will be king if we let you be, and keeper of the place until the wolf returns." "You will let me?" Stannis said. "You mistake where permission lies." Crowfoot Umber laughed then, the bark of it bouncing off the sweating walls. "There's a bit of a wolf in that stag after all." Good. Manderly's bulk shifted. His eyes darted down the table to see who would rise first to the new arrangement the day demanded. When none did, he levered himself to his feet with a grunt and, surprisingly, a grace that belied his size. "Your Grace," he said, "White Harbor will honor your word. We have always loved the wolves. We will love them more if those who stand under their trees keep faith. Bread and salt and safe conduct. And the sea, which is its own road." Stannis inclined his head. "You will send to your city," he said. "We need flour and salted meat and ships. Your coffers are not what they were, and I will not beggar your people. But I will pay." "With what coin?" Riswell asked. "With warm breath? With promises? The southern mint is far, and the Lannisters clip their coins on the way north. Pay is not always iron circles," Stannis said. He did not add that he still had the right to coin his own stamped metal. Such arguments were for another time. "The road south will open again when I have done what is next. Until then, your harbor will be my throat to the sea. I will not cut it. Hold me to the words I give you in front of your peers. If I break them, call me false to my face." Manderly's mouth pursed in a pleased way. He had wanted to hear those words. Stannis did not mind giving them. A man who means to keep his promises does not fear to speak them aloud. "The boy," Manderly said. "Where?" Theon's head jerked as if the word had pierced him. He licked cracked lips. "The youngest. I heard whisper that he was taken to a place of ponies and stones. A place men fear." "Skagos," someone breathed. The word made a little shiver down the table. "An island for cannibals." "Islanders," Crowfoot said. "And stubborn devils. They bite, but they can be bargained with if you trade something they want." "What do they want?" Stannis asked. "Their own way," Crowfoot said with a belated grin. "Like all free men." Stannis looked at Theon. "You said a name of a man who might bring the boy." Theon's face crumpled and then steadied, like thawing ice deciding whether to break. "Davos," he whispered. "The Onion Knight." Stannis held very still for a heartbeat. He did not let surprise into his voice. "He is dead," he said. Manderly's eyes flicked sideways. He fussed with his napkin. "And death is a sea voyage with an uncertain harbor," he said softly. "I heard a contrary wind. Perhaps I heard wrong." Stannis did not turn his head. He kept staring at the man in chains. Davos, who had warmed a starving boy with onions. Davos, who had argued with him until his teeth ached and who had kept faith even when banished and threatened and stripped. Davos, who understood the clean line of duty and wore it like a belt. "Bring him out," he said. "Get him warmed. Give him a cup and meat." Theon flinched as if meat were a blow. "Not too much," Stannis added, and Godry inclined his head. He had learned his king's mind. A half cup, not more. A man starved will die on kindness quicker than on neglect. When the guards moved to take Theon, Asha Greyjoy stood up from the side table where she had eaten with the men who had brought her under Stannis's banner. She moved with the loose, ironic grace of a woman who had grown on a deck and learned the balance of a ship before the balance of a chair. Her hair was black as wet rope. Her smile, when she chose to show it, had blades in it. "My brother," she said. "Your Grace." Stannis looked at her. He had permitted her name and her awkward loyalty because he saw in her a use he would not yet speak. The Ironborn loved few things more than a leader with salt in her blood. "He is not your toy, woman," Crowfoot Umber told her, grinning. "He is ours now." "He is my blood," Asha said evenly. "If you mean to have law, your grace, you should remember that even in law blood has some say. I ask his life of you." "In exchange for what?" Stannis asked. The lines around his mouth deepened. He did not dislike bargaining. He valued clarity. "Do not plead mercy. I do not know the word. What will you trade?" "I will give you my ships," she said promptly. "Those I can call back from sea and those I can steal from cousins. I will give you sailors who will not drown in a gray wind. I will give you towns along the stony shore that will not look south and spit." "You will give what you have because you want to keep it," Stannis said, "or because you see which way the storm runs. Your wanting does not purchase your brother's life. He dies for what he did. The law is clear." Asha's jaw worked once. Then she swallowed her first answer and found her second. "Then keep him alive until I prove him useful. If he is a key, as you say, you may find a lock he fits. Let him by himself with the truth he knows and with letters bearing his name. The Dreadfort still flies a flayed man. His name is worth something there. His name." Theon Greyjoy had destroyed his own name piece by piece, and now, in the end, it was perhaps the only thing left he could trade. Stannis tapped the table once with the pad of his forefinger, listening to the wood, to the heat, to the men watching him. A king is a judge with a too large bench. He had learned that as well. "Very well," he said. "He will be held. He will be fed properly and brought back the strength needed to write and ride under guard. He will not be maimed further. And he will be brought to the godswood tonight to stand before the heart tree and swear again what he has said, naming those who can hear." A movement ran through the hall like a chill. The old gods sat with red eyes in Winterfell's wood. Swearing there mattered in a way a southern oath before a mother's statue did not. He did not honor their trees, but he respected what they made of men's word. Asha let out a breath she might have been holding since the door opened. "Thank you," she said without a smile. "Your Grace." "Do not thank me," Stannis said. "Thank the boy you burned and did not burn." After he dismissed them, they peeled away from the table in clumps, unease and excitement on their faces, as if they had tasted a spice they had not known and were not sure if it bit sweet or bitter. Crowfoot went out with a gusty laugh, promising to bring in hares so fat they would sizzle on the spit in their own tallow. Ryswell bowed his head once as if conceding a point in a game he did not like. Manderley tarried, making a pretense of adjusting his gloves and wiping crumbs he could not possibly have dropped from the table in front of him. Stannis let him wait. He spoke to Massey about scouts and to Godry about punishment for looting, which would be swift and public, and only then flicked his gaze to the Lord of White Harbor. "You have more to say," Stannis said. "I always have more to say, Your Grace," Manderley replied, with that little curl of humor around his lips that never quite warmed his eyes. "But this now send to my city. Bread there may be got, not much but more than here. The seas in winter are wolves, but sometimes wolves sleep. A small ship, a fast one. I have such. If it returns with flour, men will call you provident and feed their hope." "I will send," Stannis said. "You will write it. I will sign. Do you have ink that is not frozen?" Manderley's shoulders shook. It might have been laughter. "The cooks hoard warm things, Your Grace. I am on terms with cooks." "Be on terms with me," Stannis said. And do not imagine I do not see how your gaze slides sideways when Davos's name is spoken. Your eyes are very sharp, Manderley said blandly. They are as sharp as they must be, Stannis said. If the Onion Knight is not dead, and if you have sent him to fetch a wolf from an island of stones and stubbornness, then be sure, if he returns with the boy, do not put your own hand in the way when a wolf and a stag agree to hunt together. Manderley bowed his thick head, and when he looked up again there was a sincerity in him that had been absent before, or else he feigned it with great skill. We desire a king who keeps faith, he said. We desire our children to be safe in their beds. Hold fast to your words, and you may find the North holds fast to you. When he had gone, the hall felt larger and colder. Stannis put his hand to the back of the chair and felt the tacky shine where a servant's cloth had scraped away soot. Beneath the filth that had collected since treason took the castle, there was a good hard wood. That was true of many things, if you had the patience to cut to it. Outside, the air knifed at his face the moment he stepped through the door. The light was thinning already, though the day had not yet turned. Winter's trick. It shrugged at time, shoving night down and pulling day up and making men feel adrift. He walked toward the Godswood because it was the place he would test the words he had spoken. Not before any altar of his own choosing. Not before the Red Woman and her flames. He would submit himself to a tree he did not honor because men here did. Leadership was not yielding what mattered to you. It was weighing what mattered to others and deciding whether you could carry it without snapping. He crossed the yard where they were burning the dead. The smell of it would always make him think of wet cloth and white ash. Men stood around the pyres, faces already smoked into masks. A woman hummed under her breath and placed a sprig of something green into the fire as if it were a coin. Stannis did not ask what it was. She had found it somewhere, some weed that still lived under the press of snow and stone. People spent what they had. At the edge of the gods would the wind dropped as if the trees held up their branches and said no. The snow lay as smooth between the roots as a cloth laid between two sleeping lovers. The brook that ran from the hot spring side and sent low steam that folded and unfolded on itself, clotting in the branches, then breaking away in soft breathy gusts. He could feel the heat of the earth in the ground through his boots. Even here, it was a strange comfort. It made the hair at his neck rise. Warmth is as unnatural as cold when it comes from the wrong place. The heart tree wore its own red tears. The face cut into it looked down the narrow clearing at the pool where the spring water gathered. The lips were parted in a half-hum, as if the carver had caught the tree trying to speak and had frozen it that way forever. He did not like the red that leaked down the bark. He did not like the way the eyes seemed to find the man who moved beneath them. He stood, his breath making an old man's noises in the cold. There was no one else in the wood but the tree and the steam and a brown bird that jumped on both feet and stabbed at something only it could see. He had never prayed in such a place. He had prayed in chapels, on the backs of ships, with a finger pressed hard into his palm until the pain made a clean line that led from him to his God, as if the flesh were a piece of paper he wrote upon. He did not pray now. He did not know how to ask a tree for anything and would not pretend. He let the silence grow flower-like around him and then wither because of what he was. "You will hear his words tonight," he said finally, as though the tree, being a thing of the north, could be spoken to like a man. His voice sounded small in the white room of the wood. "You will hear mine. I will not pretend to be who you wish. I am harder than your winds and less forgiving than your cold. But I do not break what is put into my care. And I do not lie when the truth will do." The tree said nothing. That was for the best. He distrusted answering gods. On his way back he passed the stables. He could smell, even through the sharp, clean taste of the snow, the familiar musk of horse and hay and manure, the way they braided into something honest. A stable boy, perhaps the same as before, stood in the door with his hands shoved under his arms, shifting from foot to foot the way a colt does when it wants to stamp but has been told to stand still. "Your Grace," the boy said, and then bit his lip, surprised at himself. "Do your work," Stannis said, but he stopped. He was not habitually kind in small things. Kindness was a currency he hoarded for occasions when it would do good, and most people asked for it frivolously. But the boy's lips were split, and he was a subject of a kingdom that had been ripped and stitched and ripped again. "What is your name?" "Tom," the boy said, as if the sound might crack. "Tom," Stannis repeated, as if putting it in a ledger. "Who was your lord?" "Lord Stark," the boy said immediately, then stumbled. The Boltons said, He waved a hand and ended the child's misery. "He is still your lord," he said, and the boy's eyes filled as if the cold had suddenly found a warmer place to bead. "Do not be a fool," Stannis added, because tears made him uncomfortable. "Pull the straw from between the boards, or the rot will get the stalls." "Yes, your grace," Tom said, and ducked his head so fast he almost said it with his hair. In the solar they had given him, the solar that had belonged to a line of men who had ruled not by right of conquest but by long love of a hard land. Stannis found parchment and pens laid near the hearth. Steam made the windows shiver with their own breath. He worked through the letters himself for an hour, his hand cramped by cold and by the old injury that sometimes woke in his fingers when the weather turned. He wrote to White Harbor and to the mountain holds, to houses that had not yet chosen, and to those that had chosen poorly and would be given a chance to correct their error. He signed his name. It was a simple motion that nevertheless had weight. His name had to carry where he could not go. He pressed his seal. Wax pooled and cooled, red as a remembered fire. A king's business was often folded up and given to a bird. There was a humbleness in that he sometimes found instructive. He was about to set aside the last of the letters when the maester came, with his careful steps and his face that looked like it hurt to wear. "A bird from the wall," the man said, his breath making smoke. "Read," Stannis said. The man broke the seal and his lips moved once, twice. When he spoke, his voice had more life in it than Stannis had heard since he entered Winterfell. "They are pressed," he said. "The weather has driven wildlings to the gates by the hundreds. The Lord Commander says he does what he can, but supplies run low. He speaks of something on the coast, a place called Hardhome, where a great gathering has gone to ruin. He asks for grain. He asks for guidance." Stannis took the letter and read it himself. He recognized the writing. The boy had a hand like a well-trained soldier's blade, not fine but consistent. He remembered the young man's calm eyes and the way he had weighed every request as a steward weighs coins, not swayed by begging. "The wall must be held," Stannis said. "If that fails, the rest is a game of kings and their tin crowns in a snowdrift. We will send what we can. We cannot send much, but we will send." "You have many hungers to feed," the maester said. "Do you think I do not know it?" Stannis asked, sharply enough that the maester flinched. He did not enjoy making men jump. It wasted energy. "Prepare a raven. I will answer him myself, and send to the kitchens. The men who carry to the wall will have food on the road, or they will eat their goods." When the maester went, he stayed seated, the letter in his hand. He had not expected the weight of the north to feel like this. He had expected steel and cold and stubborn men. He had not expected the way the land itself seemed to put its hand on his shoulder. He had never believed in this land's gods. He believed in oaths and iron and the way a man's nature repeats until you either break it or learn to wield it. Yet the quiet power of this place pressed on him like a mailed palm. By the time evening dragged its blue shawl over the courtyard, torches had been set along the path to the godswood. They smoked and flared and spat and made halos in the falling snow. The men who went to stand in that ring did not speak much. They moved with a gravity that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with a tree and their own fathers. He respected that. They brought Theon with his wrists unshackled though his ankles were still bound. A man cannot kneel properly in chains. He had learned that small, precise truth long ago. Asha walked to his left, her mouth iron, her eyes ocean. To Theon's right, Godry Faring, who would draw a blade if the man forgot or pretended to forget the path etched into the snow. Behind them came men who would witness. Manderly in a heavy fur that had once been a white bear's back, Crowfoot with his one eye gleaming, Ryswell grim and narrow, Massey with Stannis' seal in his glove, the maester with a lantern, and a handful of men of lower station whose names mattered less than the testimony of their eyes. They stood at the edge of the pool. The heart tree loomed. The red sap had frozen and then thawed in little stalactites down the grooves of the carved cheeks. The face seemed either to smile or to weep depending on how the smoke moved in the air. "Kneel," Stannis said, and Theon did stiffly, as if muscles that had been taught to curl were now being asked to uncurl too quickly. He placed his hands flat on his thighs, not as a supplicant, but as a man trying to remember that his hands belonged to him. "You will speak again," Stannis said. "You will tell the tree and these men what you told me. You will name the boys and the truth of their going. You will swear by what you held holy as a child, if any such thing remains in you, and then you will be bound to the words you speak." Theon lifted his face. The smoke caught in his hair and made it smell like bitter cooking. He looked at the tree. Something moved in his eyes that might once have been a boy standing on the wall of a castle with his arm around the shoulder of another boy, laughing at a snow sliding off a roof and breaking in midair like a white wave. If Stannis had believed in ghosts, he would have said a small thing flickered in Theon just then. He did not believe in ghosts. He believed in habit and in the lengths to which men would go to have what they wanted. "Speak," Stannis said. The words came rough at first, as if he were spitting out teeth. Then they came quicker, a man relieved, a man condemned. He told the story he had told at the table, but this time he spoke it as if he were carving it into the white wood with a dull knife. He said the names. He said Bran like a blessing. He said Rickon like an apology. He spoke of the miller's boys and of the cruelty that had seemed like cleverness and of the burning that had seemed like strength and of the despair that followed when the lie had become a crown too heavy for his little head. When he finished, he bowed his head. He did not look at the tree. He did not look at the men. "By what do you swear?" Stannis asked quietly. Theon was silent a moment. "By the salt," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "By the sea that made me. By the boy I failed to be." It was not an oath in the way the men of the North understood oaths, but it had the shape of truth, and sometimes a shape is what men need to set their hands on. "Rise," Stannis said. "You will not be flayed. You will not be mutilated further. You will carry letters written in your own hand to the Dreadfort and to men who will know your signature. You will ask for surrender. You will read my terms. If the terms are refused, you will return." "And if I do not return?" Theon asked. It was not bravado. It was weariness. "You will return," Stannis said, and there was something in his voice that made Theon look up, surprised to find an order where he had expected a possibility. "Because you understand now that a man can die more than once, and that you already have." Theon closed his eyes. He bowed his head again. When Asha touched his shoulder, she did it as if she were touching a plank tossed by a wave back against the side of a ship. Relief and sorrow braided together, as the part. "Why left the wood?" Manderley lingered until he was close enough to the king to speak without the others hearing. "You know," he murmured, snow gritting in his beard, "if the boy comes, if Davos brings him, this land will sing again. Not songs you care for, perhaps, but the kind that set a table and hold a door." "It will not sing if the wall falls," Stannis said. "No," Manderley agreed. "It will not sing if the wall falls." They moved through the corridor. Torches smoked. The stones sweated. In the distance, a woman sang, not for ears, but for her own hands as they kneaded dough into something that might yet rise despite the cold. Stannis found the sound more comforting than the boisterous tavern songs that people imagined kings enjoyed. It had the work in it. In the morning, before the snow thickened again, scout riders left through the east gate, wrapped to their eyes, their horses stepping carefully where the ground beneath the white skin of the world had frozen and cracked and frozen again. A band of hunters slipped into the godswood like wolves and returned hours later with hairs hung from their belts and a fox heavy with winter. They looked at the castle as if it were not a place of men only but of rules the wood itself demanded. In the solar, Stannis read the Lord Commander's letter again and penned his reply. He told the boy to hold, to ration, to keep the wildlings working and to make walls where walls would stand. knowing all the while that advice from a far castle is like a too long sword, awkward to swing in close quarters. He told him grain would be sent and men if they could be spared. He told him nothing of the doubts that moved under the stone of his thoughts like slow water. Doubt is a thing you keep inside your own skin. At noon they came at a run with a man on a door, the door carried by 4 northerners whose faces were set in that particular stillness you see when men mean to bear what they must. The man on the door wore furs that were too nice for a thief and a beard that had frozen into small spikes. His hand was wrapped and blood leaked through the wrapping. He was either brave or foolish. It makes little difference in the cold. "What is this?" Stannis asked, meeting them near the kitchens where heat came off the doorway in a wave. He had the instinct to run to warmth but held himself against it. "Raider," one of the men panted. "Ramsay's men, or another's using his hatred. They took a flock near the tunnel where the ice breaks. This one lost 3 fingers and still held his spear. We found him half buried and asked him his name. He said it and laughed and passed out. Take him to the maester," Stannis said. "He will wash the wound with liquor heated but not boiling. He will cut away any black that does not bleed. He will not bleed him. I will not have old superstitions spilling what we have so little of." The men shifted the door, glancing at one another. "You hear?" the largest said. "The king told you, not the maester's old songs." They went. Such moments piled up around him through the day. A broken strap on a wagon that needed mending or else the barley would spill. A woman who had lost her child and wanted to scream but did not because she was in the hall. A man who had found a stash of candles and wanted to tell someone, his eyes bright as if he had brought gold. He dealt with each, not because he possessed a great heart, but because he understood that a kingdom is built of such small things and not exclusively of banners and battles. At dusk a raven went up out of the rookery into a sky that looked close enough to touch. Winter evenings pressed the heavens down like hands flattening dough. The bird made a hole with its wings and went through, a black thread stitching 2 cold places together. Stannis watched until it disappeared and then went back to the slow business of the evening. How many men could be spared to escort the grain to the wall? How many days could they hold Winterfell without loosing an arrow or spilling a cup? When to send riders south to the King's Road to see if the snow had let the road out from under its fist. Godry Faring brought word that the men had found a hidden store of salted pork in a collapsed wall. He nodded. He did not smile. Joy is a costly thing, he spent it rarely. That night the dreams came as they sometimes did when the work of the day dug in him and gave his mind nothing gentle to lie against. He dreamed of Storm's End's walls black with salt and rain, of the sound of the sea like a beast breathing with its mouth open. He dreamed he held a sword so hot it burned his gloves, and he had to drop it though he knew that as soon as it touched ground someone else would pick it up and ruin what he meant to do. He dreamed of a boy's voice saying a name. It might have been father, but it might also have been something he had never learned to hear. When he woke, there was a hollow where his chest should have been, as if he had given a piece of himself to the night and it had not seen fit to return it. He dressed with his own hands because servants are for other kings. He took a piece of coarse bread with a smear of something that might have been butter and a cup of ale and went to the yard. Breath clouded. Boots creaked. The world was white and black and his banner looked like a piece of a story from a warmer time. In the days that followed, the shape of life in Winterfell grew visible, like the skeleton of a ship built on the beach as the tide rose and fell. Men knew where to stand for the ration. The boy Tom learned that if he held his mouth too tight against the cold his lips split worse, and so he started to slick them with a smear of fat in the mornings. Asha's laughter came sometimes from the yard as she put an axe into the plank again and again, not because she needed the wood but because the action made a rhythm that kept the sea in her blood from suffocating. Theon learned to write with a hand that did not tremble. He made letters slowly, like a man laying stones across a stream. At first he wrote only the names of those he had wronged, and then he wrote the names he hoped might answer. Names have weight in the north. He used his own with care, as if it belonged to someone he might yet learn to be. Riders returned from the Dreadfort's way with news that the flayed men still flew but food looked tight and smoke rose thinner from the chimneys. 3 plumes where there used to be 10. Men said Ramsay had gone into the country with 100 fellows he called his hunters, and they were burning what they could not take because they did not like to leave heat behind for other men to put their hands to. That was a thing Stannis understood. He did not light fires for his enemies either. The letter that went back to the Dreadfort under Theon's hand offered terms a northern man could call harsh and a southern man could call fair. Lay down your arms, open your gates, deliver the bodies of those who had led treachery into a hall that should never have known it, and the small folk would be spared the king's anger. Refuse, and the winter would do his work for him before he put his own hand to yours. What if they hang me from their walls? Theon asked as Godry checked the saddle girth on the spare mount. His eyes had grown somewhat clearer in the days since the gods would. A man's eyes tell you what his stomach and his heart have learned to accept. Then you will die, Stannis said. But not slowly. Is that mercy? Theon asked, not bitter, just curious as if mercy were an animal he had never seen and wanted to know what sound it made. It is law, Stannis said. Do not mistake one for the other. Get on your horse. Asha kissed her brother's brow in the yard, quick, almost angry at herself for the softness. Return, she commanded in the tone of a captain. Do not die where none of mine can sing you down. The party clattered through the gate and their sound faded into the white. It was like dropping a stone into a well and waiting for the splash that told you the depth. When the snow came again, it came thick and stubborn, and for 2 days the castle was wrapped in it. Every sound muffled as if under a heavy blanket. Men walked, leaving narrow ravines behind them, sides crisp as pastry, edges sagging with their own weight. The raven from the wall had not yet returned, and Stannis found himself listening for the flutter at the window, a sound he had never thought to wish for. Waiting is a labor like any other when you have no love of idleness. On the 3rd day the sky thinned. In the afternoon a shout went up at the gate, and men ran as men run when they have seen something they were told might come and did not truly believe would. Stannis was not in the yard, but he heard the cry press quickly inward, along the corridor, up the stairs, and then into the door of his solar, because there are messages that burst like birds through the house of a great man's day and settle on his table whether he wishes it or not. He stood as the messenger stumbled in, his face splashed with pink where the cold had bitten. The man held a strip of parchment in his mitten, the seal already broken because it had frozen and then shattered. He thrust it out as if it might singe his hand. From the wall, not from the Dreadfort, the bird had come back to him again, and he found, to his disgust, relief that tasted almost like happiness. He read again. He gave the letter to the maester, whose lips moved. He did not show it to the others yet. He let its meaning settle in himself. Hardhome. The name wrote itself across his thoughts like a crack. He had not been there. He had not seen the cliff face or the black knife of the water cutting at the shore, the dead fire pits, the wrecks. But in the boy's hand, in the measured lines, in the precise account that did not plead but did not lie, he felt the shape of a pain larger than any single castle's hunger. The wall could be starved, could be battered, could be undermined, or it could be outflanked by a thing that did not care about walls at all. We will send the grain, he said again, not to convince himself but to make the words sit heavy in the room. We will send men who can be spared. We will send justice when the long night falls back. The maester lifted his head. He had tears on his lashes. Men grew sentimental in winter, Stannis added to himself because saying it aloud would not feed a single mouth. And we will need more than law. That evening, when the wind had settled to a steady saw against the shutters, he went to the great hall and ate with his men. He took no more than his portion and refused the last bit of meat that Manderly tried to press on him with a jolly insistence that could have been affection or testing or both. He listened to Crowfoot's story about a bear that had learned to open latches and would come into his yard every winter to lick the iron where men had put their hands. He listened to Asha's low exchange with some mountain man about the place where sea meets cliff and how the sound there is like a drum that calls an army. He listened to the sound of his own men breathing, the deep tide of it. He did not smile. He did not scowl. He sat and did the work of staying where he had placed himself. When they brought out pies, a murmur went through the hall such as had not been heard since harvest time. The crusts were rough but golden in the way that happens when a kitchen repeats old motions with new, poorer ingredients and still keeps the memory of a finer pastry in its hands. Someone laughed and said a word Stannis did not catch. Manderly's eyes cut across the table, quick and gleaming. "You will like it," Manderly said to no one in particular, and lifted his knife. He carved. He tasted. "Excellent," he announced, "though the cooks claim it is rabbit, and I am sure it is not. There were men who would not taste that pie, because they had been raised in a certain law. There were others who would eat and call it justice." Stannis cut a small piece and laid it on his plate and ate it slowly and learned nothing from it except that men loved to make secrets into feasts and eats into oaths. He preferred his promises plain. Late that night, when the castle had settled into its winter quiet broken only by the footsteps of the watch and the hiss of the hot water finding cold stone, he stood alone under the high window where the air sometimes leaked sweet, like the breath of a bathhouse. He remembered then a thing he had learned as a boy, that a fortress does not only hold men, it holds the memory of how men hold. Winterfell remembered. It had not been built by his people or for his gods, but it remembered law and stubbornness and the long endurance of cold. He could fit himself inside that memory, perhaps. He could work within it like a man who uses another man's tools to fix a ship on an unfamiliar beach. You do not have to love a place to guard it, but guarding can be a way that a hard man grows a new root. Snow feathered against the glass, small and ceaseless. Tomorrow he would send riders toward White Harbor with letters and return letters and a list of supplies to be fetched on pain of unsparing displeasure. Tomorrow he would check the barracks and make an example of the man who had stolen an extra measure of ale and lied. Tomorrow he would drill boys with a spear and show them how to stand with their feet precisely so, the weight on the ball of the back foot, the thrust not thrown but driven. Tomorrow he would wait for word from the Dreadfort and from the wall and from the sea, and he would spend his days like coins, counting and counting again, never deceived by the small relief of a full purse when the price of survival would always be higher. He turned from the window and the white, and the thought came to him without vanity. I am the right hand for a winter like this. I do not wear out. I do not look for songs to explain me. He would not say such things aloud. The North hates boasting, he did as well. But he knew his quality. A man without knowledge of his own weight is a man who steps on a rotten plank and calls his fall a surprise. He slept then, for a handful of hours, and in the morning an old man with a beard stiff as broom bristles died in his sleep in the corner of the kitchens where the heat had made his last dreams pleasant. And a girl in the inner ward was born as the midwife laughed softly at the child's fist-waving wrath. And a raven from the east brought news that the river had frozen hard enough to carry carts, at least for a day. The castle went on. Men do not love kings for what they promise. They love them for keeping a hand on the wheel while the sea snarls. The first letter back from the Dreadfort came 3 days later, tied to an arrow that hissed into the snowbank just inside the gate. A guard had the sense to leave it where it lay for an hour, lest the shaft be smeared with something that would creep into a man's skin. When they brought it at last, wrapped in a cloth soaked in vinegar, Godry broke the string and read. He grunted. Well, Stannis said. He held out his hand and read for himself. The writing was elegant and thin, and it pleased a vicious part of him to imagine the hand that had penned it smashing against the iron chill of a window's edge and swelling like a sausage. He read. A refusal couched in words that thought themselves witty. An invitation to come and get what he believed was his, if his legs had the strength to carry him that far. A name written with a loopy pride. Ramsay Bolton, Lord of the Dreadfort, heir of Winterfell. Burn it, Stannis said, and they did, in a small bowl, the flames lapping up the words until they folded into themselves like insects. Send another letter, the same terms. Add this. I will come and get what is mine, whether my legs like the walk or not. Theon returned that same day with 2 fingers black as licorice and eyes that had learned a new lesson about cold. He did not weep when the maester cut the fingers off with a little saw and threw them on the coals to spit like fat. He did not ask for mercy when he found Stannis and held out his bandaged hand like a pledge. They laughed, he said simply, but not all of them. Some are hungry, Stannis said. Some are human. Asha stood with her back to the hearth, hands behind her, watching her brother as if he were a ship she had sent out with a patched sail and a promise and that had limped back into the harbor smoking. "You returned," she said, and then nodded once, confirmation of an order obeyed. Stannis turned over in his mind the shape of what would be needed. Men, food, fire. The mountain clans could cut through drifts even city men called impassable. The White Harbor ships might run a line along the coast if they were lucky and mad. The knights who followed him had learned to trust their king more than their horses. The wall needed grain. The dread fort required law. And somewhere on a cruel piece of rock a boy might be learning to keep his feet on goat paths with the wind in his teeth. He allowed himself then, in the privacy of the solar with the maester dismissed and his men sent to their meals, to put his fists on the table and lean his weight into them until his shoulders felt as if they could carry a castle. He was tired. The tiredness had bones like a small animal sitting in his chest. He breathed and it shifted and then it settled. He pushed the maps around with more strength than necessary. It did not tear them. He would not tear this. He would build this square by square, like a mason on a cold day, stopping only to warm his hands at the steam-slick wall before he took up the trowel again. Outside, snow fell. Men laughed in the hall at some story Crowfood was telling that had a bear and a fool in it. Asha sang under her breath as she honed a blade. Theonis at and stared at his bandaged hand and looked up at the window where the light made a mockery of blue. Wyman Manderley bent over a letter, his mouth pursed, plotting how to bake something other than pies. The gods would held the shape of an old promise in its red eyes. The wall waited, and the sea thought its long thoughts, and the dread fort answered the world with smoke. He had no songs. He had only days. He could build a kingdom with those, if given enough and if the winter did not decide to eat them first, one by one, until all that remained were bones in a hall that sweated from heat it did not deserve. He would not be eaten so easily. He had brought a hard, sharp thing north and set it down on a table. He would see it used. He would see it last.